Hi, I'm Dr. Selena Fisk, and welcome to this episode of Make Data Talk. In this podcast, I help you turn your spreadsheets into stories in a way that is practical, accessible, and hopefully a whole lot more useful than your grade 9 maths textbook. Today I'm coming to you from beside a river in Alaska. This river is being fed by the Denver Glacier. It's an absolutely stunning location. I'll make sure to drop a photo into the show notes. But I'm sitting here and I'm reading my friend Chris Green's book, Business by Design, Take Your Business from Chaos and Overwhelm to Scalable and Rewarding. And in his book, he talks about, for business owners, how important it is to come up with a compelling scorecard. And it reminded me of the 4 disciplines of execution work by Covey and I guess the focus that he puts on a compelling scorecard. So I wanted to chat with you about that today. So my mate Chris is an entrepreneurial strategist. He's an expert in coaching and mentoring business owners to scale their business, and he's got some pretty cool stories of the expansion that he's kind of facilitated with and for businesses that he's worked with. One of the things that I really like about Chris's book is that he gets leaders to, I guess, think about and strategize around the processes that we can put in place for others to be super clear about our expectations and how we operate, and I guess to remove a lot of the guesswork that can take place. And he often works with small to medium-sized enterprises, which means that, you know, they're often a small number of staff or employees. But one of the problems he sees all the time is that there is often so much information in a business owner's head and very little of it is documented. And regardless of where you work, I guess in all of the different contexts I've worked and the different people I've worked with, I see that all the time. There is so much knowledge sitting in the heads of people, and not a lot of it is out and visible and made really clear for the people who work in the organisation. From a data perspective, that becomes really tricky because, you know, in a previous episode, I talked about the importance of a data plan, and a data plan is one of those things that can help provide that clarity for people, because we can't just expect that people know what to do, what information to collect and how they should be using it. We actually serve our people best by providing that clarity for them. As I mentioned in the introduction, Chris advocates for the use of a scorecard in a similar way to what Covey talks about in the 4 disciplines of execution. So in the 4 disciplines of execution, the 4 things, the first is to focus on a WIG, a wildly important goal. The second point that he advocates for is to act on the lead measures, the lead data that is ultimately going to help you improve the outcomes and achieve the goals that you're setting for yourself. The third step is to create a compelling scorecard, and the fourth is to build a cadence of accountability. And I love the work of Covey in the 4 disciplines of execution because, you know, we're really often good at setting goals and having great intentions. We're really not great at the execution. So if you haven't read that book and it's something of interest to you, I'd really recommend it to you. Chris talks about the same thing in his book, and he suggests that we should be looking back at those scorecards monthly. One of the things I'd like to do in this episode is just read you a little section of his contribution, I guess, to this discussion, because he suggests that our scorecards that we collect and the things we review potentially monthly could include a range of qualitative and quantitative indicators. So in his business model, he kind of says, and this is a direct quote from his book, he says quantitative indicators could include revenue, gross profit, net profit, equity, debtors, working capital, sick days, retention rates, or other more specific industry measures. He says set a target and create a way of measuring data that informs the scoreboard and get consistent in reviewing it. Now, obviously, those metrics are not relevant to everybody all of the time, but as we've talked about in previous episodes, if you're thinking about what could go in your quantitative data scorecard, it's important to think about, well, what actually matters the most to you. Net profit may not be something that you have a whole lot of control over or influence over. And if that's the case, then it shouldn't really go into your scorecard. It's about choosing the data that you can actually control and you can influence. And you have, I guess, some role in hopefully improving the situation. The second part he talks about is qualitative data, and he says, this is Chris Green's quote, he says, qualitative data could include good behaviour witnessed across the team, customer commentary, work quality, examples of teamwork, camaraderie, and discretionary effort that aligns with your strategic direction. And as he says at the end, it doesn't really matter what your scorecard measures, as long as those measures are lead indicators of outcomes aligned with achieving your strategic intent, whatever that looks like for you. And it reminded me of a photo I took actually about a month ago. I was flying through Sydney Airport and I saw an example of a compelling scorecard. Really interestingly, it was to do with security screening at Sydney Airport, and it was on view for everybody to see. There was a TV screen up, and again, I've got a photo of it, so I might drop it into the show notes, but it showed the number of people who had been through security in the previous 15 minutes. It showed the breakdown of the two security lanes and the difference between the two, I guess, the numbers of people going through the two different security lanes. And it also showed the anticipated number of guests over the next 60 minutes. It was really interesting that that was sitting up on a screen where all the passengers could actually visualise it. But obviously for that team at that part of the airport, those were the metrics that mattered the most, and those were the things that I guess they were being measured on. In the same way that, you know, I'm sure you've seen when you go through a drive-thru, like a Macca's drive-thru, that's a McDonald's drive-thru for any non-Australian who doesn't shorten every word possible. But going through a Macca's drive-thru, and you'll see sometimes when, if your order's been taking a long time, there's an alert that's going off for the cashier to indicate that your wait time has been longer than it should have been. On these scorecards, it is hard to visually represent qualitative data at times, particularly if it's open-ended, text-based information about good experiences or customer comments or anything like that. That's where the categorical qualitative data can be more useful. So experiences, say, for 5 out of 5, I'm sure you've seen this plenty of times before, but often in airport bathrooms, there's a scale of a 5-point happy face to sad face scale. That's qualitative information, but that's actually much easier to visualize potentially onto a compelling scorecard. But qualitative is a bit harder. The idea, though, with a scorecard is that in a perfect world, we would color code those results. So we would be able to see the impact of our work and where we're kind of sitting over time. The example in Sydney Airport that I saw, there were lots of green metrics. There were a couple of yellow metrics. Now, I'm not sure. It wasn't super clear to me whether or what relationship the color had to the output itself, because the same value in two different places had two different colours. But in a perfect world, that's what we would have. We would be updating our compelling scorecard regularly, and we would be using colour to discern whether those results are high, middle or low. One of the things that I often work with teams and organisations around is the idea of kind of colour coding and using a different colour code system so that we can start to visually see really quickly where we're at without having to go straight into the numbers. Colours can often help us know whether we're on track, whether we're doing pretty well, or whether things are not all that great. And that's why, you know, the last time I saw a red flashing alert or a flashing alert sign in a Macca's drive-thru, it was red, because obviously it was a concern. The wait time was a bit too long. But colour can really kind of help us know whether we're on track or not. I was recently asked in a webinar what type of colour matters, and the short version is that it doesn't matter. It is about finding colours that work for you, but ultimately colours that are consistent across different platforms that you use and different approaches that you use in your team. Because, you know, in a worst case scenario, we obviously don't want green to be great in one context and green to be the second highest result in another context. We need to be really super consistent. So there's a couple of little tips there for your compelling scorecard. Make sure you have one for starters. That's a great tip. And if Chris Green and Stephen Covey think that it's worth doing, then it is absolutely worth doing. Make sure that your compelling scorecard has a mix of qualitative and quantitative data in it wherever possible. Quantitative is easier, but qualitative is equally quite valuable and can be really useful. Make sure it contains data that you can actually control. Data that is managed or, you know, more heavily influenced by other teams is not the right data. Make sure it is actually something that is within your sphere of influence, and make sure you use colour to help people ascertain the trends and the positions. And finally, make sure with your cadence of accountability, it's something that you're reviewing and talking about with your people as regularly as you possibly can. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Make Data Talk for this week. I hope you've enjoyed listening to the river that I'm sitting beside in the background. There's been a few doggos that have walked past, so there's been a few barks as well. I'm sure you might have been able to hear those. But as always, if you're not on my email list, feel free to join me at selenafisk.com. And if you want to connect on socials, you can find me on Insta or on LinkedIn at Selena Fisk. Talk to you next time.